Hello, Gwei. Welcome everybody. And thank you for joining us for the first Island Lecture Series event of the season. My name is Maggie Henry. I'm the interim coordinator of the Institute of Island Studies. I'll mostly be behind the scenes tonight, but I just have a few quick things to get through before we get started. To make this virtual experience go as smoothly as possible, we ask that you please turn off your camera and your microphone. I'll go full screen for you. We also recommend that you set the view to speaker mode rather than the gallery view so that you can have the best viewing experience. If you need to adjust your audio, you can access your audio settings at the bottom left corner of your screen. I will let you know that this event is being recorded for our Institute YouTube channel and also for Eastlink Community TV. As only speakers will be on the camera, this won't really affect you as audience members, but I do need to let you know that because we're recording, the chat transcript will be automatically saved as well. If you're not comfortable with this, please feel free to leave now. You can always tune into the recording later on once we get it online in the next few days. By staying, you are indicating your consent to being a part of this recording. If you haven't already, please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. Maybe just wait a few minutes because we're actually having a technical difficulty where you can only message privately, and I want to change it so that everybody can see what's going on. So I will fix that in a moment once I've finished talking. It's always fun to see who's here and where folks are joining us from. I am seeing some familiar names in the audience, so it's really great to have you all here. There will be an opportunity for questions towards the end, so please go ahead and submit your questions anytime in the chat once I get that set up. You can send them in the main chat, or you can send them to me directly if you prefer, by changing the "to" at the bottom of the chat field, or just clicking on my name that pops up. I will just remind everyone to please have your camera and microphone off at this point, just to make it a better viewing experience for everybody and for our recording. We have a wonderful session in store for you this evening, and I would like to begin by acknowledging that I'm coming to you from Ebikwet in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. We're gathering today on a virtual platform, and so it's important to respectfully acknowledge the history, spirituality, culture, and rights of all First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples from coast to coast to coast, who have called this land home since time immemorial, and who continue to experience the ongoing effects of colonialism and systemic racism. This acknowledgement is nothing without action to back it up, and I encourage everyone to consider how we can each, in our own way, actively honor and uphold our obligations in a spirit of true reconciliation. After all, we are all treaty people. For those of you who may not be familiar with the Institute of Island Studies, we are a research, education, and public policy institute based at the University of Prince Edward Island. You can learn more about what we do by checking out our website, islandstudies.com, or our social media accounts, which I'll post the links to shortly. The Institute of Island Studies has been hosting the Island Lecture Series in a few different formats for almost 3 decades now. We're excited to offer our events in a virtual platform this year because it means you can join us from all over the world or just down the road, from the comfort and safety of your own homes. At this point, we usually send our newsletter sign-up sheet around the room, but things are a bit different now that we've gone virtual. So if you'd like to sign up for our monthly newsletter, please feel free to pop your email in the chat and send it to me directly. We promise we won't spam you. If you're not comfortable sharing your email on Zoom, no worries at all. You can also subscribe directly, and I'll pop the link for that in the chat in a few minutes too. To get things started, I will hand over now to our host for the night, Bren Simmers. Bren is the managing editor of Island Studies Press at UPEI and the author of 3 books. Pivot Point, her latest book, is a lyrical account of a 9-day wilderness canoe trip through the Bowron Lakes Circuit in British Columbia. Did I get that right, Bren?
Yes,
and I believe it's available at Bookmark if you'd like to pick up a copy. As managing editor of Island Studies Press, Bren and tonight's guest, JoDee, worked closely together on JoDee's book, The Cove Journal, but that's something that I'll leave for them to talk about. Over to you, Bren.
Thanks, Maggie. And thank you to everyone for joining us tonight. It is really lovely to connect this way and to have a sense of community around island stories. And that's what we'll be talking about this evening. And I am the managing editor for Island Studies Press. And for those of you who don't know Island Studies Press, we are at the University of Prince Edward Island, and we've been around for almost 35 years. And we primarily focus on island stories. So whether that's the environment or the economy or culture, that is our focus, is telling these island stories. And I can't think of one of my favorite island storytellers that pops to mind is JoDee Samuelson. So I'm really delighted that we're going to get to speak with her tonight. I just wanted to address the format of this presentation. JoDee's going to be doing a short reading for us, followed by some questions by myself. We'll have a bit of a conversation, and then we're going to open up to questions from the audience. So feel free to pop those questions into the chat. And the Cove Journal was published in 2018, and it was the very first book that I got to work on at Island Studies Press. And I can't think of a better introduction to Prince Edward Island than reading the Cove Journal. And I'm delighted to introduce JoDee. Many of you may know her already, but for those of you who don't, JoDee was born and raised on the Canadian prairies. She's a filmmaker and artist who has lived on the south shore of Prince Edward Island for the last 30 years. She's always loved drawing and was encouraged in her creative pursuits by her mother, who was a commercial artist. JoDee's interest in filmmaking began when she took part in an animation workshop at the Island Media Arts Co-op in 1989. And her animated films have been shown at festivals around the world. And there is a link in the chat to the NFB site where you can actually see 2 of her films. And JoDee's also a member of the Canoe Cove Women's Institute, a wood carver, a painter, a gardener, and a baker of delicious bread. The Cove Journal is her first book, but by no means is it her last book. So I'd like to welcome JoDee Samuelson, who will delight us with a short reading from the Cove Journal. Welcome, JoDee.
I'm waiting for my technical person to, I'll put start video here. We'll see if it starts.
Yep.
There we go. Well, hello, friends and family, and I recognize Chris. Hi, Chris in California, and Marianne Hans in Montreal, and Leslie in Montreal, and Janet in South Rustico, and Jane in Newfoundland, and Tisha in Chicago, Nolig in Charlottetown, and everybody else. So it's great. Lorley, I just see you entered. Hi. So thank you for visiting me here on this dark Prince Edward Island night. It's going to be daylight saving time soon, and that's going to be just terrible. So since you can't come to PEI, it's nice to be able to connect with you in this way. And I feel like you're all my friends, so I shouldn't be nervous, even though it's been, I'm not used to any of this. But get yourself a glass of hot chocolate and a blanket and maybe a glass of wine and make yourself comfortable here. So thanks, Bren, my friend Bren and Maggie, for making this happen. So I'd like to start tonight. I'm going to be reading from the first column I wrote in 2010. And I chose the name for the book, the Cove Journal, because I live in Canoe Cove. And the island is full of coves, just coves basically joined by little pieces of land. So what goes on here goes on everywhere. And my first column was written about cottages closing up. It's called Quiet Routines. And I'm sure many of you have the copy, so it's on page 140, but you don't need to, I'll read it to you. One by one along the shore, the lights go out as cottage folks pack it in and head home, leaving us year-round cove dwellers to slip into our quiet autumn routines. Traffic to the beach is down to 2 or 3 pickup trucks a day, a far cry from the heat of summer, when every hour dozens of cars headed to the shore, filled with boisterous children crying to be let loose on the warm sandbars. Those days are now happy memories, and we embrace the season of mists and mellow fruitfulness. What a bountiful season it has been, in spite of earwigs, cabbage butterflies, slugs, and the odd raccoon. Pantries in the cove are filled with jars of strawberry jam, mustard pickles, tomato relish, and chow chow, plus dried apples, parsley, and summer savory. The chicken man will soon deliver his winter's supply of heavy roasters. It's going to be tricky fitting them into freezers already bursting with blueberries, applesauce, chanterelles, and other tasty edibles, many of which will sink to the bottom and be lost by spring. Good wild apples are still out there by the roadside waiting to be picked. That tree down by the bridge has late apples, good keepers, so help yourself. We've already picked enough to make apple pies for the bean supper at the school this month. What's the secret of good baked beans? Follow the directions on the package, says our local baked bean expert. Some of us put garlic in our beans, but garlic isn't a common flavor in the Cove. All the same, a lot of people are growing it, and this is the time to go down to the shore and get seaweed for mulch. Garlic needs thick winter cover, and any kind of seaweed or leaves or straw will do nicely. It's surprising how little seaweed washed in when Hurricane Earl made its brief visit to our district. There were some piles of driftwood shoved up against the banks and a few clusters of crab bodies, but no mounds of eelgrass or kelp. Still, you can always find what you need if you're willing to carry it home in small loads. Someone brought a pumpkin chiffon pie to Women's Institute last month. Exquisite. People, don't throw your pumpkins away. Don't crash them on the road. For that matter, don't smash my mailbox either. I don't remember anyone smashing mailboxes in Anne of Green Gables. I think we'll take our mailbox in on Halloween, just to be safe. So, that's my first column. And from then, Bren, you want to say something?
I just want to say that I'm chuckling as you're reading that. And that's the one thing that we don't get in a live audience is people laughing about mailboxes and not being smashed in Ellen Montgomery's novels. And so sorry, I couldn't resist. I think you're going to read something else for us. So I'll pop back out.
I will. I'm going to just read sort of what my notes, because then I'll just remember what I said. I was going to say, although I always loved reading, I never saw myself as a writer. So that's why I started writing the Cove Journal. And if I go back a little further in time, in 1984, I was in the education program at UPI, and we had the amazing English professor, Claudia Mitchell. Some of you may remember her. She gave us various appealing writing assignments, and one of my creations was a book of children's poetry titled Not Straight at All. Not Straight at All. And I'll read you a poem with that title. It's in my little book of children's poetry, and there's this straight done by Daniel Basiletti, that little drawing. So the Northumberland Strait, S-T-R-A-I-T. The Northumberland Strait is not straight at all. To call it a strait takes a great deal of gall, for it twists and it turns wherever it pleases, while nodding hello to the friendly south breezes, past the Egmont, Bedeck, and Hillsborough Bays. When I think of the NB side, I feel frankly dazed. Past inlets and outlets, past wharves and past beaches, past lighthouses, towns, and far away reaches. As crooked a strait as you ever did see, just the way it's supposed to be. So that was one of my little book of children's poetry. And so I guess you can see that I've always kind of been interested in the physiognomy. Is that how you say physiognomy? Physiognomy, whatever, of the island, the shape of the island. And I'll just keep going for a minute, Bren. Years later in 2010, I was accepted into the Island Studies program at UPI, doing a study of mills, water mills of PEI. And I was writing, and I really liked it. So at that time, Peter Richards the buzz had been going for quite a few years. And I was friends with Peter from my time at Island Media Arts Co-op when he was the coordinator and I was making films. And so I noticed that most of the content of the buzz was about Charlottetown. So I asked Peter if he'd like me to write a column about life in the countryside, and he said yes. And so I started writing the Cove Journal. So, Bren, are you there? Should I keep going?
I'm here. I'm going to pop back in. It's such a treat to hear you read. I really love getting to hear an author read their work, and you get that sense of the rhythms and the, the cadence of their speech. It really lifts it off the page. So thank you for reading that. I just put in my garlic this weekend. So yes, October is about that indeed. I'd love to ask you a question about where do you get the ideas from your essays from? So when you all joined us, you saw the illustrations that we're sort of cycling through in the beginning, and each one of JoDee's columns has a beautiful illustration that accompanies the column. And I'm just curious, where do the ideas come from? Which comes first, the image or the idea?
Well, I'll just look at what I've written here for my notes for that question. Thank you, Bren. I start with the idea, something that strikes me as something that I could write about, and I look around and try to draw it. I don't know, whatever it's going to be, I'm going to draw it. And when I have my drawing done, then I put that up in the corner of my computer screen and I write my article. And for example, for November, I wrote about my experience self-isolating after a trip recently. And so I went down to the end of the driveway and drew the sign I had painted for the end of the driveway saying self-isolating. So then I have my theme, and then I try to write a beginning about the theme, and then I try to write an end about the theme, and I just fill in the blanks, fill in the middle, and Bob's your uncle.
Oh, I love it. So there's sort of a rhythm to when you're writing it. Do you just walk out your door and sort of see something and it snags your attention? Like, is it?
Yeah, well, I mean, sometimes I just look, if I can't think of something, I look at through my sketchbook. I keep a sketchbook with me, and if I see a drawing I like, then I think, well, I'll just try to draw something. I don't know, a nice little landscape or something's good for anything, so whatever. I'll just tell you that I draw with whatever I have on hand, whether it's pencil or a marker, a Sharpie or something. And then I scan it in to my computer and I clean it up with Photoshop. I put it to the right size for the buzz. And I have a Cintiq monitor, which is a fancy kind of upright drawing monitor from Wacom. And you draw on it with a stylus, just like a pen. And I started using that when I was making animated films for my last film. So it's really a great tool. I recommend everybody have one.
What's nice when you can adapt your tools from one genre to another, and that's something that I'm really curious about. As someone who has been a filmmaker, an artist, you see some of the paintings behind you. You're also, you play music. How do you decide when you feel inspired, what outlet you're going to express yourself through?
Well, well, I know I have the buzz column on the 15th of every month. So that's like, I don't need to worry about that. So there's like the rest of the month, the rest of the time, what am I going to do? Well, I just wake up in the morning and I mean, let's face it, I'm spoiled. I live in Canada. I live on Prince Edward Island. And like many of people who are tuning in here, we live in Canada, and we can express ourselves freely about whatever our views are, and we can get involved in things that we want to get involved in. So I have a great deal of freedom, and maybe I'll wake up in the morning and I'll feel like I've been making whirligigs. So I put a little, here's a little whirligig guy. There's no wind blowing, but I mean, I've got a whole bunch of different little, he's even got his little axe and his wood block, but he's great when he's turning. Here's another, I made a bunch of fishermen, this year's little whirligig. So that takes a lot of time. I go up to my shed and I'm able to fuss with that, or maybe I'll paint, or maybe I'll go to town to the dentist, or I mean, I don't know, who knows, stuff.
Yeah.
Whatever the day calls for, I will do, just like the rest of you. I don't have a real big life plan.
Yes. Yeah. I love the flexibility in that, in sort of listening, waking up and thinking, okay, what wants to come out today, and that there's so many ways for it to come out. That's something I really admire about you as an artist.
Oh, thank you.
And something else I was really curious about with this book, because I came on sort of halfway through this project, but the book, for those of you who haven't read it, it's arranged seasonally. So it starts in the winter, and JoDee has these really adorable illustrations that start off each season. I don't know if you can see, these look like the most comfortable slippers. I hope some of you are wearing slippers like this right now. And So she has sort of all of the Januaries and then all of the Februaries and then all of the Marches, and then we get into spring. And so you have this sort of the stacking up of year after year in this sort of seasonal structure. And I'm just curious, how did you decide upon that structure of seasons?
Well, I can't take any credit for it at all because it was Laurie Brinklow's idea. Thank you, Laurie, if you're there. And of course, you helped too, Bren. So, and I think it's great. And Laurie also came up with the shape of the book, which is so I love it. But I think putting the pieces together in seasons gives a nice structure because the months are together from year to year. They're like what happened in October this year, and then what's in October the next year. And there's definitely a rhythm in the Cove, or a rhythm with all of our lives, because you're not digging potatoes in spring, or you don't see the geese in the middle of summer. So things happen again and again. And I need to find some way to make each article interesting and slightly different, so I don't repeat myself.
Do you, so you find that there are these sort of these rhythms that recur, but then there's also sometimes perhaps things that are outside of that rhythm. Then I find that you capture that in your work as well. So it's a nice balance between the two. You see your life reflected in this rhythm, and because you're living in this rhythm, you also notice when something is outside of that, something unusual. Yeah. Perhaps you would maybe read another short excerpt for us so people can hear another.
I will. I was just going to say that I have been writing for one of the things I'm kind of proud of is I wrote a story about my two sons' stuffed little animals, and it's a story of Mama Gonga. That's Mama Gonga, and she's talking to this blue jay, and they're going to go setting off on a big adventure and rescue. Anyway, it's a book that someday may see the light of day. But until then, I'll read you from my next little thing, and I'm going to read. It's called Old Bones, and people who in November 2012, it doesn't seem like it's that long ago, but there was this push to put the new Trans-Canada Highway through a different route across a valley where there were these old hemlock trees. And I just said okay, that's fine. My internet connection is unstable. You still hear me, Bren? Okay. Yeah, okay, good. So, people on the island aren't great at marching, and they're not great at demonstrating. And so, but it was amazing. There was this large collection of people who did camp down by that river to try to save these hemlock trees. But alas, it did not work. And the highway goes through Peters Road now, and those hemlock trees are gone. But anyway, this is called Old Bones. And I like it because it's kind of lots of history in it. So with the wind blowing impetuously and chestnuts in their sharp casings crashing onto the roof like small bombs, this is a good day to be inside by the fire. It's a taste of days to come. This was November 2012. I'm kind of glad I'm not out holding that honk sign on the Trans-Canada, because people were encouraged to honk as they went by to support the movement. I can't help thinking of those folks who were camped last month down by the hemlocks on Peters Road. They had a lot of rain, and the campsite was damp and muddy. We brought them some cake and sandwiches and hung around by the old hemlocks for a while, wondering what it is about hemlock that canadensis takes 250 years to reach maturity and can live 400 years or more. These trees grow best in moist soil with good drainage and have few natural enemies besides man. Hemlock bark is rich in tannin and was once shipped off island by the barrelful, by the train car full actually, for use in the leather industry. Imagine how many trees there must have been. In olden days, hemlock beams were used for barn floors because of their resistance to rot, to urine actually. A tea made from the inner bark was used by native people as a remedy for colds, fevers, diarrhea, stomach troubles, and scurvy. The bark was used as a poultice to slow bleeding. When travel writer Walter Johnstone visited PEI in 1820, he saw hemlock trees 3.5 feet in diameter and 80 feet high. The hemlocks at Peters Road are smaller than this, but impressive nonetheless. They may be 250 years old, which means they sprouted in 1760, or about the time that England took over PEI. Our most famous island artist, Robert Harris, wrote about the Bonshaw Hills in Island Prose and Poetry. He was out with a team of surveyors cutting a line through the woods for proprietor Robert Stewart of Strathgartney when they encountered a threatening group of feisty locals coming full tear up the hill, waving heavy sleigh stakes. Whatever sleigh stakes are, I don't know. Needless to say, Harris and his compatriots beat a hasty retreat. Maybe there's something about the Bonshaw Hills that promotes feistiness. I like to think that Robert Harris would have enjoyed the current ruckus on Peters Road. He probably would have made friends with the protesters and made a beautiful painting of the campsite. Nature Trust's booklet, Scenic Heritage Roads of PEI, has this to say about Peters Road. A sense of history, both human and natural, prevails on this pleasant country lane. There was once a sawmill and a furniture factory here. On top of the hill, just up from the protesters' campsite, is a small pioneer cemetery, the resting place for families stricken by diphtheria 100 years ago. We hope the highway construction won't be disturbing these old bones that have already suffered enough. It's time to go down and throw another log on the fire. Supper will be simple tonight and it will feel good to turn in early. So, November 2012.
Thank you.
But I think people are happy with the highway more or less and scoot along faster. I guess it's okay. You know, we kind of forget everything and just start using, you know, anyway, it's a fait accompli.
Well, thank you for recording that. And that's one of the things I think that this work does so well is it pays attention to the places in which you live and that you spend your life in, and that kind of place-based writing is something that I'm really drawn to myself. Writing that is rooted in the places where we live, that's rooted in observation, that's rooted in the everyday, in those details that you so beautifully observe in your book. And we see those sort of rhythms come through when you write about the perennial sale or the strawberry social, things that are very much of the Cove and that happen in other places around PEI as well. And I'm just curious if how is this practice of observation and reflection on your surroundings? How has it affected your perspective as an artist? Or perhaps this is your perspective of this. Your perspective is always been focused on the local and the details. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about that.
How writing has affected my or how painting, or what was it again?
Sorry, JoDee, you cut out a bit.
What was your question, just succinctly?
Question is what do you think we gain by focusing our attention and our art on the places that we live?
Okay, well, I mean, writing about Canoe Cove, calling it the Cove, it's really what I know. It's where I live. It's where I spend most of my time. I'm not an expert on history like Hilary Mantel, you know, who's a fantastic, beautiful writer, or there's so many writers who just say, oh my God, how do they know so much? How can they do it? But we all have our gifts and we have our, we all have something. I always thought, oh, that's already been painted. That's already been done. That's already written about. But, you know, when you think that artists have spent years doing self-portraits over and over again, or painting the same, I mean, the same scene out their window, and So I mean, we can write about the same things over and over again. It's going to be different as long as you're not actually, plagiarizing what you wrote before. It's basically what I can do is what I can do, and what other people do what they can do. I personally love reading books about small places, but I told you this earlier, Bren, that I had tried to get a film started with the NFB, and I'd said I'd like to make this film about the wreck of the Flora T, which was a ship that a 3-masted schooner that went down off of Canoe Cove carrying bricks from Pugwash to Charlottetown in 1913 to rebuild the basilica that had burnt at that time. Anyway, the cook at this lobster factory in Canoe Cove saw it and saw the boat disappear, and this whole thing about where's the ship and who's on it, and finally was discovered who had what had happened. Two men, one from Summerside and one from the other side, died. And so I said, well, this is a perfect thing. It's something I know a lot about. There's lots of it in the newspaper, and it would be a great film. But oh no, it's too local. It's too local. It wouldn't have a large appeal. It's like, man, that's the kind of thing I think that actually does have the huge appeal. And but anyway, it was as I mentioned to you too, Bren, I said, well, that's one film I don't have to do. So that's like another 4 years of my life. I can do something else.
Exactly. Well, it's the universal in the details. And that's one of the things I love about your work, is that you feel like you get a sense of what it's like to live in your life and to live in the country and to live on PEI. So it's one of the things that I think readers have been really enjoying about your work. I got a wonderful email shortly after JoDee's book came out that said, it feels like I'm sitting in front of a wood stove with a cup of tea when I read her book.
Mr. Rogers.
I feel the same. Our lives have been a little bit different in the last 8 months. I mean, normally we would be sitting in the same room. Here we are talking through a screen. And I'm just curious if the pandemic has affected your creative process in any way. Has it affected what you do?
No, not really. It's been, I've just loved, I'm not saying I've loved it, no, I don't want to be sick, and I don't want my friends be, no, nothing like, and I don't, all these people dying, it's terrible. But as far as having to stay home, I mean, I'm a Scandinavian, and if I have a little shot of rum or something in the evening, I'm good to go. But I love the being on a retreat, or being that I'm of an age where I'm not having to go back and forth to town, and so no, it hasn't really affected me at all. It's maybe, I'm not gonna say made me more creative, but it's been okay. Sorry.
No, it's good to hear. I know some creative folks have found themselves unable to create in this time, and other people have been doing having a lot of inspiration because they've been home more, they've had a slower life, a quieter life. So I think it's so interesting because everyone has a different answer to that question.
Well, I think it would be different if I had family members or close friends, or I knew a lot of people who had died. I'm sure that would take the stuffings right out of me. And so we're just lucky to be here, and so far so good. That's what it is.
Exactly. That makes me think, I saw a few people say hello in the chat and say where they're from. So if you feel, I know it's working now, so if you feel like you want to just throw out where you're watching from tonight, it's always fun to see where we all are and coming together in this moment in time. I'd like to ask you one more question before I open up the questions to anyone in the audience. So if you've had a question that you're thinking of, you can start typing it in the chat, or you can send it directly to Maggie. But my last question for you before I open it up is, are you working on any new creative projects right now? And if so, can you tell us about them?
Yes, thank you for asking. Well, there's a little tie-dyed or batik, whatever. I guess it looks more like tie-dye, doesn't it? But it's just the cover. So I finished my early autobiography. It's called Birth of a Hippie, and it's from my childhood, my birth, to my 1971 when I moved to PEI, and with Robin, my partner at the time. Robin and I started the health food store, the Root Cellar, and our baby was born, our baby Hans. And so this is, I mean, it's a graphic novel, and there's that actually looks like the house in Rustico where we lived. That was, they called it the Harbor Hootenanny House because we had these hootenannies who played music. There wasn't a windmill, but I'm trying to like promote the hippiness of the time. So it, can I say it's great? I think it is. It's not, it's black and white. There's some more, oops, so what's going on? There's somebody washing clothes in a stream. I mean, you don't think that really happened, but actually I did have a friend who was doing that. And yeah, there I am pregnant. So it goes straight from, anyway, it's fun. So that, and if I ever could get a publisher, which who knows, maybe I will someday. It's not a good time to get things published. Maybe I'll continue on from my time through the health food store to who knows what, that may happen, but it hasn't happened yet.
Thank you, JoDee.
It took me 2 winters.
2 winters, yeah.
2 winters. And I had sort of an outline of that already because I had started a film for the film board called basically something like that. It wasn't exactly like that, but I already had the characters drawn. I had like they're all birds. And
yes, I love that.
So yeah, they're all birds, and I already had that kind of character design, so it's very easy for me to draw it, and I could draw that forever. So
right, it's good to hear a little bit of the backstory of the sort of creative process. Like with the Cove Journal, your columns sort of stacked up over time to create this book, but with the graphic novel, that you would have the characters, that you would have an outline, and that you would work on it through 2 winters. I'm always happy to hear the behind the scenes of how long it takes people to work on things or what their process is, because
well, my film Mabel's Saga, I think, took 3 or 4 years, and I mean, I had my dear friend Leslie do the backgrounds, and that was huge. And my first one took 3.5 years, so I'm used to things taking years. But if you just keep at it, if you just get up and every day you do a little bit of something, you do eventually get a big bit of something. And so
exactly. I often think of the Annie Dillard quote about how we live our days is how we live our lives, that accumulation of whatever we do every day, and how that we look back and we go, oh, I have you said to me the other day, you said, well, if you live long enough, you'll have a body of work.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
Some people. When during this pandemic, I was listening to Jane Eyre, and I mean, Jane Austen, yeah. Is that it, Jane Austen? She only she was only 40 years old or something when she died, and she did all this like millions of words. So there are people who get a lot done in a very short period of time too.
Yes.
So they work harder than I do, though.
Well, we each are at our own pace. That's something I always try and remind
There you go.
I see there's a few questions that have popped up here. So I'm going to ask you a question from Noleg, and they're asking, how have the people of the Cove responded to your articles?
Well, a lot of them came to my book launch. A lot of them bought books to give for Christmas presents. So I think they're pretty proud, actually.
Good. You haven't had anyone say, well, that's not me?
No, I haven't. They're saying, oh, did you see the last one that's got so and so in it? And no, it's not. I've had well, I don't think I've ever said anything bad about anybody. So I mean, what can you? It's not. I'm kind of everything I've done in my life, my projects, so my films. Well, I always said Mr. Rogers. It's they're not Mr. Rogers-y kind of thing, like on the internet about Joe Biden recently. Not like that, but I guess I had a pretty cheerful childhood, and I'm more let's find the good things in life than dwelling on the misery and woes or trying to find fault with people. So
yeah, And I think that's why some readers have said that they find your books really inspiring, or they keep them on the bedside table because of that, because they're uplifting, because they are these sort of moments that you sort of hold up and look at.
Yeah.
I have another question here from Lori from Charlottetown, and she asks, oh, JoDee, can you tell us more about what you studied in Island Studies and what your big takeaways from the master's program were? Do they show up in your writing?
One thing I learned doing the master's program was you better be able to back up what you say. So now if I say something about a hemlock tree, I really want to know that they do live for 400 years. I don't want to give footnotes, but that was something I had missed in the rest of my life. I just said things, but now when I say things, I want to be sure that other people have actually studied it, and yeah. So that was a good thing to learn.
Very,
That good,
very
Laura?
good takeaway. I have another question for you from Barbara from St. Peter's Harbor. And she says, I'm a student in the Bachelor of Integrated Studies program at UPI, but interested in tips on place-based writing to supplement my nature photography. So any tips for writing that would accompany an image, sort of like what you're doing? How do you come up with that stuff in the middle?
I'll tell you, if you want to write to Bren, and she can forward you my email, and you can write to me personally, I'll be happy to have a little conversation with you about it. I don't know that there's any secret, but we can have that conversation between the two of us. I suppose I don't know exactly what to say right off the top of my head.
I'll jump in if you don't mind, JoDee, and say that one of the things that I find really important in place-based writing is observation. Is sort of looking around and thinking about your five senses. What do you see? What do you hear? What do you smell? What do you taste within reason? what textures do you notice? And just even using the five senses as a way to jot down what you're noticing, what you're observing. You might want to jot down the temperature or your feeling, and then just sort of gives you something to base the writing off of. But
yeah, that's good, Grant. Listen to what she said. That's exactly right. Observe.
One of the place-based writers that I think of in Halifax, his name is Brian Bartlett, and he did a book called Branches Over Ripples. And he basically went to all the different waterways, lakes, rivers, sort of throughout the Atlantic region, and just sat down in the spot for an hour and a half and looked and listened and just wrote down what he observed. So that's a good place to start. I have a question from Stacy here, and Stacy's from Charlottetown. And she says, have you had the experience of writing about a real person and that person came to ask you what inspired you to write about them? How do you handle that?
Well, usually if I'm writing about a real person, I'll ask them, first of all, can I write about them? And I mean, there's a couple articles, a couple things. Myrtle McNevin, my neighbor, or Florence McCannell, I wrote about them. And so, yeah, so if I'm going to mention somebody by name, I'm going to ask them first if it's okay.
Exactly. So. Yeah, no, that's always a good rule of thumb. I know in my last book was a memoir, and it was about really good friends. And I gave them the book before I gave it to the publisher, and I said, okay, read this and let me know if there's anything you can't live with, because I didn't want to present them in a way that they would feel uncomfortable with. So I think that's an important thing. I don't see any other questions up here, so I get to ask you another question. Okay. And JoDee, I don't know if I've said this to you before, and if I haven't, forgive me, but I think of you as a mentor in many ways, in terms of, well, in gardening, and JoDee's always helping me with plants or giving me plants, but also in terms of being an artist. And having lived on a small island on the edge of the Atlantic Ocean for the last 30 years, how do you make it as an artist? Do you have any advice for other artists out there on how to sustain yourself, or how to what sustains you as an artist living on a small island? Is it your community? Is
You
it,
mean financially?
well, it could be financially, it could be where do you get your ideas from? It could be
Well, I think first of all,
conversation.
you do have to have some sort of financial something or other. And when I went into education, I thought that would be some way to sustain myself and fall back on and practice my art on the sidelines. But then I substituted for a while and that didn't work out. And then I got into filmmaking and I became a film animator, and I worked for the film board and for, made some Canada Council grant stuff for 25 years. And of course, I also have a fantastic partner who worked for the provincial government. And so that was a big help too, even though it was a part-time job, we always had plenty to live on. So now I can kind of relax as long as just, so that's good. But one thing I was going to say about, I wrote it down. I should write this. So you lived in an artist, what sustained you? I said, I'll read what I said. I said, you can't be me or anyone else. You can only be you. When I started studying animation, I was told by Ishu Patel, he was a famous NFB animator. He said, don't go into animation. It's too hard. Do anything else. But of course I didn't listen. And today I'd probably tell a young person the same thing. I'd say, don't do it. But you got to do what you got to do. You have to do what seems right for you and what you can afford. You have to make a living. So have something you can fall back on. I thought teaching would be my security, but I was never able to secure a full-time job. And I'll just read you this. I should tell you why I went into education. I was finishing up my BA art history course at UPEI from Father Arsenault. If you remember Adrian Arsenault, he knew everything about art, everything but art history, and he was a good painter himself. So I really admired him. And so we were given an assignment to talk about the artist of our choice. And I made a slideshow about Georgia O'Keeffe, who's another artist I admire. And I put on my slideshow and I gave my little talk. And when I was done, Father Arsenault stood up in front of the class and said, I wish you had been my teacher. And I was like, oh my God, what a lovely, I couldn't believe it. And so I began from that moment thinking about going into the education program, which I did. And it just reminds me that, whatever we say to young people, we should be very careful about what kind of advice or what we say to them, because they actually listen to what we say and it can affect them, and it can change their lives like it changed mine. So that's it for that.
I appreciate that, and I think about your mom encouraging you in your creative pursuit, right? Like we are easily influenced by the people in our life when we're young.
Well, my mother being an artist, I mean, she did, after she got married, she didn't practice art. When my father was a minister, and so he was a writer, you'd have to say, because he wrote all the sermons, and so he was always writing. He had a typewriter, write, and so I had help from both ends, and I took music lessons. And one thing I was going to say is, like, another thing, learn everything you can. And childhood is the best time to learn things, of course. And you learn to whistle, you learn to blink with one eye, you learn to, you learn all these things in childhood. You have time to ski, you have to do all these things that are so hard as an adult. And I was even thinking of my mother-in-law, Anstis Esmond White, who she, as a child, had learned to stand on her head. And so even in her later life at a party, she would be the life of the party standing on her head. Everybody be clapping and cheering. So just learn whatever you can. And it'll always, especially if you're in theater, it always comes in handy if you can juggle or do whatever. So exactly. If you're young and you're listening, get busy learning to juggle and whistle, stand on your head.
Well, we have one last question from a young fellow who's near and dear to you. Daniel asks, what will you be working on this winter?
Daniel, hi Daniel. What will I be working on? Well, I don't quite have my thoughts in order about that yet, Dan. I might continue on with the hippie thing. Yeah. Or I'm writing these novels. I finished one. It's called Peg and Elmer, and it's about this island farm couple, sort of people we used to kind of live with. They're not, it's fiction, but it's like living on the country with these farm people. And so I finished the first novel. I'm halfway through the next, but I'm kind of had writer's block. So maybe that'll be my project. Try to finish that this winter. Daniel knows who I'm talking about. he was a little boy when we lived there.
Well, that sounds like a wonderful project.
Do you want me to read one more thing, Bren, before we're done?
Why don't we close up? I'll get you to read one more thing, and then I'll say.
All right, and again, thanks everybody for tuning in. If you're still there, it's been fantastic. I hope. Well, you know me anyway, so I'll show you. Okay, so this is my article for the November buzz, my upcoming buzz, and there's the drawing I did. It's called Self-Isolating, and it's just on a piece of paper down at the end of the driveway. And I'm calling it Dear Dr. Morrison, and I do feel very grateful for the healthcare we have on PEI, and we'll just anyway. Dear Dr. Morrison. For those of you who don't know, Chris and Tisha and so on, she's the head of the public health on PEI, and she's lovely. She's been just great with her little updates. Dear Dr. Morrison, on behalf of the people of the Cove, I'm writing to thank you for taking such good care of us. Your fireside chats, well, there's no fireplace. They're eagerly awaited, and we have heeded your admonitions to be patient and take care of one another. Life in a cove is definitely different. Last week, our Women's Institute met in the old school, and we all sat so far away from one another that it was hard to hear what anyone was saying. Also, the furnace was only blowing cold air. I suppose it was out of practice. So we kept our coats on and limited the small talk. Still, it was nice to see folks again. Next month, we'll hold a community meeting to pay the bills and decide when to shut off the water in the old school. But there'll be nothing else to discuss. No Christmas concert, open houses, living nativity, or New Year's levee. Perhaps in spring, we'll be able to plan a rhubarb social, and you're certainly invited. The Atlantic bubble has been lovely, and some of us have ventured further afield. Was it worth all the hand sanitizing, mask wearing, social distancing, Lysol wiping, and paying at the pump? Yes. While Zoom is amazing, the physical presence of real, honest to goodness human beings is even better. 2 weeks of quarantine, or is it self-isolation, and can anyone tell me the difference? 2 weeks was a small price to pay for recharging our spirits. Thank you, Dr. Morrison, for having someone phone us daily to inquire about our state of health. Did we experience shortness of breath, fever, cough, etc., etc.? No, no, no. Had we left our property? No. Was someone available to bring us groceries? Yes. And we appreciated the bottle of vodka that was thoughtfully dropped off at the mailbox to assist in the creation of delicious olive-soaked quarantinis. You might wonder how people fill their time during isolation. My list included audiobooks, Huckleberry Finn and Jane Eyre, reading, Wolf Hall, physical activities, digging the garden and stacking wood, plus New York Times crossword puzzles and Netflix this and that. Self-isolation wasn't a punishment, it was a gift, and I was sorry when it ended. But on day 13, when we got a final call from your people telling us we were free to go, it was a good feeling to know we weren't contagious. We immediately hopped on our bikes and hightailed it down to the cove, where the air was as pure, the seaweed as wet, and the rocks as slippery as ever. On our way home, 2 ruffed grouse scooted across the path to say hello, then ducked into the woods and vanished. We hadn't seen any grouse lately, so it felt very special. You mentioned that on Thanksgiving Day, your family members said how thankful they were to live on Prince Edward Island. We feel the same way. Thanks for all you do to keep us healthy and safe. Sincerely, your friends in the Cove. So that's my column for next month, Buzz.
That's a wonderful sneak peek right there. Thank you for that, JoDee. And thank you so much for having this conversation tonight together. Even though we're through a screen, I feel like it's a warm conversation, and I feel
It is.
in the
Yeah.
chat for everybody who's been with us tonight. So thank you so much, everyone, for coming. Thank you to the Institute of Island Studies for hosting this event. Thank you to Maggie. Thank you to Adam for filming this for Eastlink. And if you haven't got JoDee's book, or you're thinking this would be the perfect book to get for a friend, there are links in the chat. You can buy it at the Bookmark if you're in town, or if you're in the US or elsewhere in Canada, you can buy it through our distributor. The links are in the chat. As well, please follow us on social media. Like us on Facebook, do whatever medias you do feel right for you to keep in touch with us. And thank you again. Stay safe, stay healthy, and we'll meet again soon. Good night, everyone.